Welcome to the October Q&A. Like last time, this time also I've received a lot of emails with questions, so I will not be able to take all of them. So what I've tried to do is I've tried to pick the questions that are most relevant for a large number of people, and the questions that I've not been able to answer, the relevant ones I have kept in my backlog. So hopefully I'll get to that in subsequent months. So the first question is related to looking and checking portfolio on a daily basis, and how should one go about it. So what I do is, like you all know, I have different portfolios, right? So the largest allocation is towards the long-term portfolio. Then I have allocation towards the quant part that I do, and I also do some bit of positional techno funda trading or investing, whatever we call it. And so it's segregated into these compartments, is the way I look at it. And typically for my long term portfolio, I hardly ever look at the prices. I mean, what I do is whenever I buy a stock, I will go ahead and put in price alerts at different levels. So a higher level and a stop loss level that I have in mind. So typically, let's say if I buy a stock at 100 rupees, I will decide a stop loss beforehand in my mind. That stop loss could be from using technical analysis, or could be a simple price correction or a price drawdown stop loss, like a 30%, 35%. So if I'm buying a stock at 100, I'll probably put a stop loss at 65, 70 rupees. I'll put a price alert, and on the upside I will put a price alert, let's say at 200 rupees or something like that. So I know that, okay, whenever I get an email, if once those prices are breached, I will then go back and check what is happening. So that's what I do. I have my personal portfolio created on Google Sheets. I find that the most convenient, because last few months, in fact, Google Sheets, the update has been slightly delayed, or there's been some problems, but previously it used to be quite good. So I've got a Google Sheet set up with multiple tabs, one tab with all the transactions. So it has the date, what stock I'm buying, how many, number of shares, which brokerage account, and what price. So I have, incidentally, I don't know whether I've said this before, but I have multiple brokerages purely from a risk management perspective. So I have a Zerodha account where I do most of my quant stuff. Again, simply because quant requires a significant amount of churn, and the lesser brokerage that you pay, the better you are. So a discount broker for quant, and I have Sharekhan and Kotak Securities and an HDFC Securities account. So basically, I don't want to get into a situation where there's a problem with the broker, because most of the money that I have is in equities, or nowadays in debt funds also. So what I do now is, you have there's this segregation of brokerages based on the kind of investment that I'm doing. So for long term, I'm using one. For the positional trading, I use another. So long term, I have split between two brokerages, and the ones I've chosen in such a way that even they are evenly split between the depositories. So the two brokerages use CDSL, the other two use NSDL. Just from a risk management perspective, this is what I have done. For people who have only one brokerage, I would definitely recommend that you, especially for those whose portfolio is growing and has become a significant or a large sum of money, it's a good idea to think about having a second brokerage, especially and when you're picking a brokerage house, pick one of the more reputed ones, and because you don't want to get into a situation where after a few years the brokerage house just folds up and goes away. Okay, so and try to see that if you have an NSDL demat account, try to see if the second brokerage that you pick has one in CDSL and so on and so forth. So coming back to this, I think the problem with checking, before we get there, for the long-term portfolio, this doesn't make sense to check prices all the time, right? Daily absolutely makes no sense. Maybe once a week, maybe once every fortnight, it's fine. You need to have a broad idea about where the stock is. For a positional trade, or for where if you are trading, right, then you need to have a little bit more frequent understanding of what the price is doing. But for investing, especially if you're doing long-term investing, it's better you not check prices very frequently, because what it does is it stimulates you towards doing something. Otherwise you need to train your mind to basically not do anything, which is not something that is very easy, right? So I think one of the biggest challenges that I have seen over the last few years is people say they have a long-term horizon for investing, but they are actually looking at the market from a very short-term lens. And I wrote a blog yesterday about it. It's there on blog.intelsense.in. It's also there on Value Picker. Basically, the idea is that, I get a lot of questions asking that, markets are at an all-time high, should I invest? Or, markets have already gone up. So people assume that because it's gone up so much, it cannot go up further, or because it has fallen so much, it cannot fall further. So these kinds of, fundamental assumptions that people make about market is a problem in itself. These are psychological problems while investing, right? And the challenge is that you never know what tomorrow brings. We don't know if a lot of people were waiting for a correction to happen during or immediately after the US elections. It did not happen, right? And that is what and the challenge is that it is not a definitive thing, that there are no rules in the market. You can never say that because this has happened in the past, this is going to happen again, right? You need to work with probabilities in mind and what is the most likely scenario in at a point in time. So my point that I'm trying to make in a more convoluted way is that be very careful or be very cognizant of the time frame that you have chosen for your investment and behave accordingly. If you are a long-term investor, then look at maybe monthly or quarterly changes in the business. See what is going on in the business in terms of whether it is doing better or worse. If you have a long-term horizon but you're checking prices daily, it's not going to help you. Similarly, exactly on the opposite side, if you are a positional trader doing swing trades for a few days, and you look at quarterly results and annual reports, again that is not going to work. So you need to merge your investment time frame with what you are doing in terms of actual actions. The next question is that it can be seen that we have a pharma heavy portfolio, and looking at results and triggers, the allocation seems justified. But one more sector which is giving good results and showing strength is IT, but we don't seem to have any allocation towards IT sector. What are the reasons for that? Are we expecting lower growth in IT, or other sectors or companies are well placed at the moment? Okay. So first thing is I've shared this thought process on IT sector in India multiple times in the previous Q&As, even in my writing. See, the basic problem with Indian IT companies, in my opinion, is that they are structurally poor businesses, right? The Infosys of the and the TCSs of the world of 20 years back is not the same as today. They're not growing at 30-35%. They don't have 25-30% margins. Today it is a race to the bottom for all these players, because there's the service offerings are fungible between each company. What company X is doing is exactly what company Y can do. The people move from company A to B. Service offerings are the same. You listen to their con calls, and if you don't know who those people are, even the jargon used are the same. And I say this because I have spent a very long period of my time working in a very large IT company. I have today friends in nearly all the big IT companies in India in very reasonably senior positions. So I get to hear what is happening around in all these companies, and basically things are not good. I mean, a lot of you are from IT industry, and I would welcome it if any one of you find that your company is doing exceptionally well, or the prospects are very good. Please drop me an email saying that and I would be happy to look at it. But what I find is that I don't find any IT company really doing anything great in India. And that is the unfortunate part. And we can delve into why it has not happened, and our historical mistakes, but maybe we'll keep it for another day. But the problem is the low margin businesses, low growth businesses, they've become like sort of utility businesses, right? The only good part is they have good cash flow, but they are unable to grow. And unfortunately, if you've seen my style of investing, I focus a lot on growth, right? Because whatever I have seen is the market gives a lot of leeway to companies which are growing, with respect to higher valuations, with respect to falling less if things go wrong. So good growth hides a lot of challenges, and unfortunately none of these companies are able to show good, strong, consistent growth, right? And the other thing is that I am not very keen on looking at, okay, if the sector of the month kind of, or the flavor of the season kind of thing, that okay, if IT stocks are doing well, should I run ahead and go and take a position in that? Basically, when you're doing long-term investing, what you really need to do is you need to understand the business prospects that are likely to unfold over a period of time. Now, TCS or an Infosys or a Mindtree or an L&T Infotech or an L&T Technology, all of these companies, I'm not suggesting that any of these companies are bad companies, but the problem is that there are 5,000 listed companies roughly, and if you select between various parameters, you will find that between 100 to 200 companies are they would come up as good companies in our filters, whichever way you look at it. So out of those 200, you cannot buy 200 stocks, right? You are looking for 10, 15, 20 stocks. So there is where you have to use your subjective judgment, is which out of those 200 will I choose? And that then comes your, your judgment, what parameters you give more emphasis to. So for example, like I said, I give more emphasis to growth. I give more emphasis to consistency of growth, good quality management, better return ratios. So all of this is what I look at, right? And I don't find any IT companies in my top 10, top 15, top 20 in my list. And the point is that if I am able to generate equal or better returns from other companies, there's no compulsion. There's no one who's putting a gun to my head and saying that you have to buy IT. That is the benefit of being individual investors. That is the benefit of being non-institutional. There's no one who's saying that you cannot do this and you cannot do that. You can pretty much do whatever you want. The next question is on GMM Pfaudler. And the question is that it was bumped up to a very high valuation and then the OFS came with a 40% lower valuation. I am wondering how you protect yourself from these kinds of situations. Now, it's actually very, very difficult to protect from these situations. Practically impossible. So, like in the movie Forrest Gump, which is one of my favorite movies, it says there, right? Shit happens. Problems will happen. And if problems happen, there has to be some kind of an mechanism by which you reduce the impact of those problems. There are ways. One is you diversify adequately. That's why we do not have 1 or 2 stock portfolios, right? That's why, no matter how good a company, you're not putting in 100% of your equity capital in one company. That's why you're diversifying into, 5, 10, 15, 20 stocks. So that, if something really goes wrong, you don't lose a lot, right? So that's one. Second is, like I always keep saying, stop loss is a concept which is extremely important, not only for traders, but equally important for investors. Maybe we do not have very strict stop losses, not 1, 2%, 3%, 5%. Maybe we have more liberal stop losses, 25%, 30%, 20%, whatever it is. But the concept of stop loss is very, very important, simply because it tells you as an investor that you don't know everything about the situation in the market, right? Either you've made a mistake in terms of buying the right company, or you've made a mistake in buying it at a right time, right? So even if you're making a mistake of timing, that is also still a mistake, right? Because end of the day, the money, the capital that you have is finite, right? And capital, as I keep saying, it is sacred, because once that capital goes away, there is no way for you to get it back, right? So the most important learning for an investor is how to ensure that you don't lose capital over a period of time, right? So adequate diversification, having stop losses, and the acceptance that these kinds of things will happen once in a while. No matter what you do, no matter how good a portfolio you have, once in a while, some kind of shit will happen, right? The other thing is that the other aspect in this particular GMM Pfaudler story is okay, so let me come to that later. The other aspect of GMM Pfaudler story is that this was a stock which was extremely highly valued. I think the PE was more than 100 or something, although PE is not the right metric, but the market cap was just way out of whack. Now, one thing that as an investor one could have done was you keep selling into strength. When price keeps going up and there is a parabolic move in the markets, you keep selling and taking profits out. Now, there is also a counter argument to that, is because you never know, where the top is, right? You might sell a stock at 100 rupees thinking that it's overvalued, and then it can go from that 100 to 1,000. And this has happened. I mean, this has happened in the Harshad Mehta bull run. This happens in every large scale bull run, because in a last phase, the blowout phase of a bull market, uh, stocks just have parabolic moves. And the beauty is in being able to catch the last part of the move, because then what you are having is you're getting a huge move in a very short period of time, right? So the point is that there are no easy answers. There's no foolproof way of being able to protect yourself from these kinds of situations. Okay, the next question is, what is your take on mutual fund industry and a company like HDFC AMC? I think in general, mutual funds are likely to do very well over the long term. Financialization of savings is the new buzzword. And if you look around, when I look around myself, I see this happening. A lot of my friends and a lot of people who I interact with, people who are younger, much younger to myself, who are just joining the workforce. What I see is that the first day, first week they join a company, some bank relationship manager is going to come and open the savings account, the salary account, and basically pitch a SIP to them. So yeah, I mean, it's there for the long term, that's for sure. And in the shorter term context, if I look at what is happening with the interest rates getting lower and lower, and also couple that with the marketing campaigns that are being run, like the mutual fund sahi hai, and individual mutual fund companies reaching out to people in across the country, in tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities and towns. I think that penetration is improving, with a lot more mobile app based investing coming in, with things like Paytm and now Zerodha and the other guys. The penetration of mutual funds, direct mutual funds, are increasing, and it is going to increase more and more, in my opinion. The other aspect, I think, is whenever we think of mutual funds, at least whenever I think of mutual funds, I think of equity funds. Now that is not that is not the only area where there seems to be a lot of retail interest. What I found is that there is significant amount of retail interest building up also in the debt funds side, simply because of the interest rate situations, and there are a lot of people who depend on income from from their savings or from their accumulated capital, and the debt funds are actually doing a reasonably good job in terms of giving them those kinds of returns. So I think over a period of time, the mutual fund and the asset management industry is going to do very well. HDFC AMC, of course, because of their brand, the reputation has been extremely good. It's a good company, extremely strong distribution network. Having said that, I think their equity fund track record for the last 5 to 7 years has been pretty dismal, and the valuations are not, I am not comfortable with the valuations that HDFC AMC or any of these larger AMCs are at. And the other problem that I find is that this business is slightly cyclical, so they will go up and down with the market sentiments. But yes, over a period, I think these are good businesses and one should have them on their radar. The next question is on Reliance. Do you have any view on Reliance? Of course, you cannot be in the markets without having a view on Reliance. Everybody has a view on Reliance. My view is very clouded. What I find is Reliance basically now is, sort of very clearly demarcating itself into three separate businesses. One is their legacy business of refinery, oil and gas, and chemicals. The next one is Reliance Retail, and the third, of course, is the most sort of probably which touches us all the most is Reliance Jio. And over a if I take a long-term view, maybe 20-year view, I think the refinery and the chemicals and the oil and gas business is going to slowly lose value over a period of time. Retail ideally should do reasonably well, although I don't, anecdotal evidence, again, not very something to be relied on, but I've never seen, I've been to a lot of Reliance retail outlets in Calcutta, and I've never seen any one of them crowded, unlike maybe let's say a Shoppers Stop or any one of the other Pantaloons or Big Bazaar. Maybe Big Bazaar and Reliance Retail probably are not in the same segment, but I've never seen a lot of footfalls in Reliance Retail. I go a lot to Reliance Digital. Again, I mean, even the local Calcutta-based chains probably have more footfalls than Reliance Digital. Again, this is anecdotal evidence. I don't have any data or numbers to sort of back that up. But again, so my point I'm trying to make is that the three businesses, the future looks very cloudy to me. There is a lot of enthusiasm in the markets because you find a lot of every day, every week you find a lot of marquee companies coming in, taking a stake in Reliance, especially in Reliance Jio. Now, if I just stop and think about it, if it was my company and I was doing very well, I would not sell stake to somebody else, right? So the point I'm trying to make is that Reliance as a group has a lot of debt that they needed to reduce very, very quickly. And that is why they are selling stake. That is why you find that other companies are coming and taking stake, and it's been in the news, lately. The difficulty right now for me, at least, is to be able to value the stake in each of these companies, each of these segments. And I don't want to, I don't believe in hope investing. I don't think that it makes sense to give valuations based on how things might look in the future. So, till clarity sort of emerges, I would like to stay out of something which I am neither able to understand nor able to value. We have maximum allocation in any stock at 7%. Whenever stock price goes up and then stock percentage allocation in portfolio is increased, then we rebalance our portfolio so the stock allocation is back to 7%. Okay, so I'm not very sure I understood the question. So first of all, I think what we have to understand is that last changes that I've made some changes in terms of increasing allocations to add or to remove cash holdings and to buy or add to the holdings that we had in the existing stocks. So that is something which is what we've done. Usually, see, the challenge that I have in the allocation part is that every day, every week, we have new investors coming and joining us. So the model portfolio that you see, the allocations are based on the starting portfolio. So, when a person is starting off, how should he or she allocate their funds, right? So the problem, I some time back I tried to give the mark to market, or basically the allocations based on current price. Now both these strategies have their pros and cons. The problem is that, again, because people come in at different points in time, their buying prices of the stocks are different, right? So obviously their mark to market valuations or allocations will be not valuations, but mark to market allocations will also be different, right? So it's very difficult for me to then give a very definitive point and say that, this is this is 5% and that is 2% and things like that. So what I try to do is, like I keep saying, 1 or 2% here and there in allocations is not going to make or break anything. The allocations, try to follow it based on your initial allocation. So basically, let's say you started off with 10 lakhs and the initial allocations to a stock was, say, maybe 5%. So you put in 50,000 rupees in the stock. So subsequently, if I say, and let's say the price goes up during the period of holding, and now from that 50,000 it has gone to, say, 70,000. So your allocation has gone up to 7%, and then, or whatever, and then I say that you add your starting allocation, make it to 6%. Doesn't mean that you will sell the existing that you have at 7% and bring it down to 6%, right? Typically what I have done is, till now, is I have exchanged cash levels with stock allocations. For the first time after I started the advisory for 1.5 years, now we are fully invested. So going forward, what is going to happen is we will only be able to do switching. So I might say, okay, sell stock A and buy stock B. Okay. Now again, the problem will be that stock A, some of you will have an allocation of 2%, some will have 3%, some will have 5%, depending on when you've bought, right? But in my books, maybe let's say the allocation, starting allocation was 3%, right? So this challenge of allocations will remain. There's no easy way out of this. In fact, there's no hard way out of this as well. So I spoke to a lot of my friends who run advisories, and a lot of them actually don't give allocations precisely for this reason. But I think just because it is tough, it's not good that I not give allocations at all, because giving the allocation at least gives you a sense of how much to buy, whether it is you buy 7-8% or whether you buy 2-3%, right? So keep in mind that these allocations are, you don't have to get to it exact decimal point, but roughly if you get to a stage where you are able to replicate that, then you should be reasonably okay. Okay, so the next question is, explain about stop losses and how to use it in our investment and trading. So I had written a pretty detailed blog post on stop losses. I'll try and do a separate video where I'll talk through this stop losses, both technical, using the technical charts, and but for now, that if you're really interested, go and read that. I've given the link here. You can read the blog post. I think it's pretty instructive. The next question is there any way we can hedge? Is there a market valuation at which you would recommend a trailing stop loss orders? I've never used them, but do you recommend using protective puts? Okay, can you share some thoughts and insights into how we can prepare ourselves for an eventual crash? So first of all, I don't know what an eventual crash means. That the sound of it sounds very fatalistic. I am personally not a very fatalistic person. So hedging in theory sounds, really, really cool. That, you are able to protect the downside, and in ideal circumstances, it's basically negatively correlated. So if your portfolio is going down, your hedge positions are going up, right? So that's what it is. But in reality, hedging is like buying insurance, right? It will cost you money. If you're buying a put option, it will cost you money. You'll have to pay the premium. And the thing is that over a very long period, I mean, if you're doing it for over 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, what you will find is that you've actually lost much more money trying to hedge than if you had just sat through the crashes, right? So again, this concept of all these concepts are related to the time frame of your investment horizon. This is why Warren Buffett does not recommend hedging, right? Why? Because his time frame is he can sit on a stock for 20, 30, 50 years. But if you're a trader, if you have a bank nifty futures position, then yes, you might want to hedge it, or you might want some kind of strategies where you take care of the downside, right? So it basically depends on what you are trying to do, right? See, the best and the most important thing is you trying to understand, especially in a long-term portfolio, in trying to know and understand what those businesses are doing that you are invested in. That's number one. And have a very patient, calm, a Zen-like attitude towards investing. Because all around us, what you are seeing is people are hyper reactive, whether it is the political spectrum, whether it is, everybody is nowadays become very, very reactive. You say something to people, they just, people are unable to take it, whether it is on social media, whether it is in real life. People are, the threshold for reactivity has reduced tremendously, right? In all our society. So the competitive advantage that you can have is if you are calm and quiet, right? If you harness your mindset in such a way that 10-20% up and down in stock prices don't make a difference to your life, then that is what you should try to achieve mentally. And that will come to an extent by managing your personal finance well. And some of the best practices of personal finance is, number one, diversify your assets, right? You don't put everything in stock market. Have a little bit of equity exposure. Preferably have your own house. Have a little bit of gold. A lot of these, these are things which happen naturally for people. So for example, if you are married, gold is something which is by default, you'll have to, buy for your wife or your daughter once in a while. Getting your own house is something that I recommend everyone. This whole, there was this concept of renting for life. I think it's a very stupid concept. Having a house of your own is very, very critical because of the psychological benefits it provides you, right? Then next thing is keep enough money aside in debt funds or other income bearing asset, debt funds or fixed deposits, right? And especially people who have invested a lot in the stock markets, one thing that you should do is after every 1 or 2 years, or whenever you find that there's this 2-3 years of lot of earnings from the markets, you take aside maybe 10%, maybe 15%. You don't have to take out everything, but take out a little bit and put it in some other asset class, right? Just for diversification's sake. Be good at your primary job. If you're doing a job or if you have your own business, be good at it so that even during a market crash, your bread and butter income is there, right? Uh, Live within your means, preferably below your means, and this is something which I cannot just emphasize enough. A lot of people I've seen, especially younger people these days, uh, they get into a job which pays them 30,000 rupees a month, and the first mobile that they will buy is an iPhone, right? Which costs them double of what they earn in a month. uh, I'm not against material pleasures. I'm trying to say is that uh, basically this hedonic treadmill is it's exactly that, right? It's like a treadmill, and once you get on it, it's very difficult to get off. There's no upper limit to upgrading your life, and there's not much of pleasure that you will get by buying or getting new things, right? A lot of my friends buy very very expensive cars, and I'm not I myself love cars, but I would hesitate a lot to buy a very expensive car, right? Because uh, the more expensive the car, the more higher maintenance it takes, the higher cost of ownership, and so on and so forth. You are again, there is a balance, right? You cannot become cheapskate in everything, just penny pinching everywhere and then not living your life at all. So there has to be a balance. The idea is that if you live comfortably within your means, the sustainability of that comfort is likely to be longer. Very important point is never to leverage and invest in equities. I have had investors who've come to me after I've started the advisory, people who've completely blown up. They've taken personal loans and invested in the market, and then the market crashed, and not only that had they lost all the money, they had actually they're now in loan, right? They have to repay that loan. So that's a miserable situation to be in, right? So never leverage to invest in equities. What is the worst that will happen is you will get rich slowly, and what is so bad in that, right? And don't start doing futures and options trading. Again, basically leverage trading. If you are not a full-time, if you are not knowledgeable, and if you do not have a history of being a profitable trader, these are not mutually exclusive. You need to be all three. You need to be a full-time investor or a full-time trader. You need to be knowledgeable about trading, and you need to have a history of being a profitable. If any one of these three are not there, don't try it, because ultimately you will pay a very heavy price, and nobody wants to get there, right? Always remember that it's there is always going to, and Charlie Munger has said this, my sort of my guru. He's said this, that there's always someone else who's going to get richer faster than you. And that is not a tragedy, right? I believe that earnestly. They're always going to be. Mukesh Ambani is always going to be richer than all of us. Probably all of us put together. So what? Right? So keep that in mind. Okay. The next question is, what is your take on companies like Nestle, HUL, Asian Paints, Berger as a part of the core portfolio? Okay. So again, all of these companies are great companies. And as you've probably seen, heard me speak or write or looked at the portfolio, I personally love compounders a lot. The reason why I love compounders is two things. One is because they keep growing in a secular fashion for a very long period of time, and you don't have to do anything. You just, buy and pretty much forget for as long as the business cycle keeps going on, and you keep tabs every quarter, or that things are on track. And some of these companies have been at it, in terms of secular growth for many, many years. I think I was, looking at Asian Paints. Asian Paints has not had a down year for the last 20 years, something like that. So phenomenal track record for a lot of these companies. Now again, I discussed this earlier. 5,000 companies in the market, you'll find 150 to 200 good quality companies, 50 to 80 companies out of those 200 where you can invest at a current point in time. So basically, I had talked about this the market side and the business side of investing in a couple of Q&As earlier. So here's the same thing. So the business side, good businesses, maybe you will find 200 good companies, and out of those 200, maybe 50, 60, 70 would be investable at a point in time where the valuations are okayish, where you can still go ahead and buy. So you can't own all of them. I mean, you can, if you buy 80 companies, you are then pretty much becoming like a Nifty 100. And if you're sort of closet replicating an index, you will not, your performance will be similar to an index, and you cannot do much. Your results will not be very different. So I've tried to depict slightly visually. This is the standard 2x2 matrix, the Boston BCG matrix. On the x-axis, you have quality of company. So you have poor quality, basically starting from poor quality on the left to going towards great quality companies on the right, and where you have industry headwinds at the bottom going to the industry tailwinds at the top on the y-axis. Now, I would prefer great companies with tailwinds. That's my first choice. If I find all 10, 15, 20 companies with that configuration, I will go for that. And then I would slightly prefer tailwinds more, without compromising a lot on the quality of the company. So which again tells you what I told you earlier, that I like growth a lot. Here tailwind is giving you that impetus of growth. So the more but I will not go and buy average quality companies or poor quality companies, right? Even if they have a lot of tailwind. So, and the last option for me would be to buy great companies, but where they are temporarily facing headwinds, right? And then you buy and hold them, and your payback period is slightly longer. Payback period as in when you will start getting decent returns from it, probably is going to be slightly longer, because you would need that headwind to be converted to a tailwind. The flip side is, when there is a headwind in great companies, you are going to get them at a cheaper valuation. The stocks marked in 1, they will always be high priced, higher valuations, because everybody knows that they are great companies and they have tailwinds, right? So they are the typical stocks which are in momentum at a point in time. Most of them, I mean, I'm not talking about some fraud kind of companies who go up. I'm talking about good solid, maybe BSE 100, 200 companies which have strong momentum. Typically they have strong momentum because there is earnings growth, there is a industry tailwind happening, and you have a good company background toward behind it. So that is the mental framework that I have, and I try to stick to those areas. So the problem with most of these companies that you've named is that they are all great companies, but most of the time you'll find that either they are overvalued significantly, or you could get similar plays where other characteristics are better, where probability of future earnings growth is better. because end of the day, what will happen is it's going to be very difficult for a Nestle to double itself, right, in terms of revenues. Whereas if you buy a reasonably smaller size company, it's relatively easier for a company with say 1,000 crore top line to double, because they will need only another 1,000 crores to add to it. Whereas a company which has a 10,000 crore top line needs to add another 10,000 crores, which is not obviously an easy thing to do. And that is why you will find that, very, very large companies, their growth rates tend to stall. So again, probably I'm talking in circles, but if you see that all of these things sort of reinforce each other, the larger you grow, the growth rates tend to falter a little bit. And again, because my focus is a lot on growth and sustainability of the growth and the longevity of the growth, I usually think that I'm able to find better companies which will give better returns than a Nestle or a HUL kind of thing, kind of company. Now, whether it is actually possible or not over a cycle is something that you will have to see. I have personally seen for the last 10-15 years that I've been able to do it fairly consistently over the last say 10-15 years. So hopefully that kind of idea should continue to perform. I think that was the last. Yes, that was the last for today. And thank you. Keep the questions coming, and talk to you again next month.